What if I told you that back in the late 1700s, architects were actually designing river gates shaped like human anatomy?
Yeah, and not just for aesthetics. They literally thought it would, like, moralize the people walking through them.
Which is just wild to wrap my head around. Or what about wealthy lords paying fortunes to build fake crumbling ruins in their backyards?
Right, just to, feel something, to manufacture a sense of history.
Exactly. We are jumping into this fascinating 100-year window, basically the 1750s to the 1850s.
It's a very busy century.
Seriously, because in this window, architecture completely stopped being just, a silent shelter.
Yeah, it really became a weapon, a tool used to completely re-engineer human society.
Right. And for you listening, to learn, our mission today is to look at the sources and figure out how three massive forces change the buildings we still walk out of every day.
Those forces being the Enlightenment, so, that fierce faith in science, plus the political upheaval of global revolutions, and then, of course, the brutal arrival of industrialization.
So people weren't just, like, writing political manifestos about these shifts. They were deciding to physically build them.
Exactly. The sources we're diving into today frame this whole era around three core themes: reason, revolution, and romanticism.
Reason, revolution, romanticism. Got it.
Right. And architecture during the century was basically being wielded as a scientific instrument, a tool for political control, and an emotional rebellion.
Okay, so to understand how all this altered our future, the sources say we actually have to start by looking at how they dug up the past.
Yeah, quite literally dug it up.
Right, because the Enlightenment's obsession with science and, like, natural law got supercharged by an archaeological dig, right?
It did. In the mid-18th century, they started doing massive excavations of Herculaneum in Pompeii.
The Roman cities that got buried under volcanic ash.
Exactly. And suddenly, antiquarians are circulating these incredibly accurate, measured drawings of ancient ruins all over Europe.
Just sending out, like, floor plans of Pompeii.
Yeah. And it triggered an absolute explosion in what they called grand tour travel, people going to see these perfectly proportioned Roman columns in person.
Because before this, the dominant architectural language was the Baroque style, right?
Right, the Baroque.
Which, as I understand it, was basically the public relations wing for absolute monarchs and the church.
That is a great way to put it.
Just designed to completely overwhelm your senses with, like, swirling plaster and gold everywhere.
Highly theatrical. It was meant to project this unquestionable divine right.
But then the Enlightenment thinkers look at these newly unearthed Roman porticos, and they see something totally different. They see mathematical perfection, a physical manifestation of natural order.
Right, and that gave us Neoclassicism. It offered a clean break from the kings and the church.
So they turned the classical syntax of Rome and Greece into teachable universal rules.
Exactly. You had theorists like Jacques-François Blondel writing entire treatises just to standardize axial planning and modular proportions.
Okay, but how does standardizing a floor plan actually change human behavior? I mean, it's just a floor plan.
Well, Blondel and his contemporaries believed that geometry could literally enforce social hierarchy and rationality.
Really?
Yeah, think about it. If you design a civic building where a citizen has to walk down this long, perfectly symmetrical axis just to reach a magistrate's desk.
Oh, wow. I see.
Right. The architecture is physically enforcing deference and order. They were trying to take the chaotic nature of human society and force it into a rational grid.
So instead of relying on a king's whim to project power, you just rely on math.
Exactly.
That immediately makes me think of Thomas Jefferson, because looking at the sources on Monticello and the Virginia State Capitol, it really feels like he's using architecture for historical branding.
Historical branding, I like that.
Well, yeah, think about it. America was this brand new, highly experimental democratic startup, and Jefferson needed to give it instant credibility.
Right, and needed a foundation.
So he essentially downloads an ancient, highly successful operating system, the Roman Republic, and installs it in the American mind using columns and domes.
It functioned remarkably like an operating system, yes. He was adopting those Roman orders to literally embody civic equality and republican virtue.
But the sources also make sure to point out the huge historical nuance there, right?
Oh, absolutely. We have to impartially look at the whole picture. Jefferson was projecting this egalitarian civic virtue in stone while simultaneously operating a plantation built on enslaved labor.
Right.
So the classical architecture was, in many ways, masking a profound contradiction in the New Republic. The columns projected an ideal of universal reason that the reality simply was not meeting.
The architecture is acting as a very convincing cover story.
Exactly. And the French revolutionaries utilized this same classical language for their own ends, too.
Oh, right. The Panthéon in Paris.
Yes. Originally designed as a church, Sainte-Geneviève, but when the revolution hit, the French repurposed it as a monumental mausoleum for their heroes.
Burying them inside a mathematically perfect classical temple.
Right. They were taking the incredibly chaotic, bloody reality of their revolution and wrapping it in an illusion of eternal, rational order.
Okay, but here's the thing. You can't just mandate rationality forever without hitting a wall.
No, you really can't.
Or, I guess in the case of some of the architects in our sources, removing the walls entirely.
Oh, you're talking about the paper architecture.
Yes. I was looking at these sketches in the deep dive materials. There's this drawing by Etienne Louis Boulet for a cenotaph to Isaac Newton.
It's incredible, isn't it?
I couldn't quite wrap my head around the scale of it. It looks like a giant hollow planet just sitting on the earth.
It's essentially utopian sci-fi for the 18th century. Boulet designed this 150-meter spherical monument.
Wait, 150 meters?
Yes. To put that in perspective, it would have absolutely dwarfed the pyramids.
That is massive.
And it was meant to be completely hollow inside, perforated with these tiny holes so that during the day, sunlight would stream in to look exactly like a starry night sky.
Just pure, unadulterated geometry To inspire cosmic awe.
That was the goal. He wanted to strip away all the messy Baroque ornamentation and just use pure physics and scale to overwhelm the viewer with the power of human reason.
And then there's Claude-Nicolas Ledoux, who, according to the sources, took this obsession with geometry into direct social engineering.
Oh, Ledoux, yes. He designed an ideal, though largely unbuilt, town called the City of Show.
And this is where the anatomy comes in, right?
Indeed. Ledoux proposed those river gates shaped like phalluses.
Okay, let's unpack this. Phallic river gates. Why?
He claimed it was to celebrate the fertility of the river, and, in his own words, to moralize labor.
Wow.
Yeah. He also designed spherical houses specifically for the town's barrel makers, the Coopers.
Wait, they had to live in spheres because they made barrels?
That was his logic. He reasoned that since they made round objects for a living, they should literally inhabit round spaces.
Are they designing towns, or are they treating humans like predictable cogs in a machine? Because dictating exactly how a barrel maker should live, based purely on their economic output, that feels borderline dystopian.
The historical consensus actually leans heavily toward the dystopian view. Ledoux explicitly wrote a treatise proposing architecture as a form of legislation.
Architecture as legislation? That's heavy.
He genuinely believed that if you dictate the shape of the walls around someone, you can construct a better citizen. The physical environment would mandate moral behavior.
Did any of this actually make it off the drawing board into the real world, or was it all just paper?
Well, the spherical houses did not get built, but the underlying ideology of using buildings to control morality, that definitely did.
Oh, really?
Yeah, real-world industrial experiments drew heavily on these utopian ideas. You had Robert Owen's industrial village of New Lanark in Scotland.
I saw that in the notes.
Right, which attempted to create a perfectly controlled moral environment to manage the grim realities of factory workers.
Treating the whole town like a moral machine.
Exactly. And in Prussia, Carl Friedrich Schinkel fused Greek architectural rigor with this new moral mandate. He designed the Altes Museum in Berlin, not just as art storage, but as a temple of knowledge.
To actively civilize the public, walking through its colonnades.
Precisely. To educate them simply by having them move through the space.
But here's my pushback, and I think the sources back me up here. Human beings aren't geometry equations.
No, they certainly aren't.
If you push people into cold mathematical reason and spherical houses, they're going to push back. Like, emotion has to go somewhere.
Right. And it went straight into the Romantic movement because pure reason is exhausting and frankly often deeply alienating.
Right.
So the Romantic backlash completely rejected this cold, calculating classicism. They turned toward the sublime power of nature, human emotion, and history.
And in architecture, this erupted as the Gothic revival.
Yes.
Which is such a massive stylistic whiplash. I mean, we go from perfect Roman spheres and grids straight into pointed arches, gargoyles, and shadows.
The shift is profound. Figures like Horace Walpole, who built Strawberry Hill, and later Augustus Pugin, they didn't just prefer the look of medieval architecture.
What did they argue?
They argued it was fundamentally, morally superior. Pugin actually viewed classicism as pagan, cold, and dishonest.
Wow.
He championed pointed arches and rib vaults as representing deep faith, organic growth, and a genuine connection to a nation's true history.
And you see this same emotional shift in the art of the time, too. Painters like Turner and Friedrich painting these moody atmospheric landscapes with, like, crumbling ivy-covered abbeys.
Exactly, valorizing the decay.
Which brings me to one of my favorite details in the sources. These wealthy estate owners who were hiring landscape designers like Humphrey Repton.
The sham ruins.
Yes, they were paying a premium to build broken walls on their properties, like they would construct a brand new stone structure and intentionally bash it in to look like a collapsed medieval church.
Right, they became incredibly popular centerpieces in English country estates.
It's almost like manufacturing nostalgia. It feels exactly like buying pre-distressed jeans today.
Pre-distressed jeans? That is a perfect analogy.
Right. You're paying extra for the holes because the hyper-rational present feels too sterile. You want the vibe of authenticity without having to actually wait 4 centuries for the decay.
They certainly wanted that aesthetic of ancient decay to evoke melancholy, a sense of deep time.
Just to feel something other than math.
Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. The Gothic revival eventually synthesized with the very rationality it was rebelling against.
How does that happen?
Well, a French architectural theorist named Eugène Viollet-le-Duc looked at these crumbling Gothic cathedrals and argued something completely counterintuitive.
Okay.
He said they weren't just about irrational emotion, they actually possessed a profound structural truth.
Wait, how does a gargoyle or a vaulted ceiling have structural truth?
Think about a Gothic cathedral's skeleton. The flying buttresses on the outside, the ribbed vaults on the inside. They aren't there just for decoration.
They hold the building up.
Exactly. They are the literal, exposed framework channeling the massive weight of the stone down to the ground. Viollet-le-Duc argued that exposing these honest materials and the actual structural mechanisms was an early form of highly rational engineering.
Oh, that is fascinating. So he's saying Gothic architecture is actually basically a machine.
Yes. And by highlighting this structural truth, he perfectly bridged that emotional obsession with the past directly to the incoming, highly engineered industrial future.
Because if exposed structure is the new goal, you don't need to build with heavy stone anymore. You can use the new materials of the Industrial Revolution.
Precisely. Cast iron and steam power completely obliterated the previous limits on what a building could even be.
The scale of it all just explodes.
It does. It escalated at a dizzying pace. It starts around 1779 with the Iron Bridge at Coalbrookdale, which proved just how immense cast iron's structural capabilities were. And from there, figures like Isambard Kingdom Brunel started building monumental railway stations and suspension bridges. They fundamentally redefined human spans, speeds, and how we even perceive distance.
And then we get to Joseph Paxton's Crystal Palace. Built for the Great Exhibition in London in 1851. I saw the numbers on this in the sources, and the scale of standardization is just staggering.
It really is. It featured roughly 900,000 panes of glass.
900,000.
Yes. Supported by prefabricated iron columns, the entire structure was dry bolted together on site in just a few months.
It's essentially a massive, modular IKEA greenhouse.
Yeah, basically.
Yet, it accidentally invents the spatial feeling of the modern world. I mean, when you walk into a giant shopping mall or a massive glass-walled airport terminal today, you are stepping directly into the legacy of the Crystal Palace.
Absolutely. It offered an interior of unprecedented daylight and openness. It was this megastructure that felt entirely weightless.
Our sources are also very clear that we have to ground this dazzling lightness in the grim reality of the era.
We do. As impartial observers, we have to look at the whole picture. The Crystal Palace was the absolute pinnacle of industrial optimism, but it was born from a very dark factory aesthetic.
Right, because for every beautiful, airy glass exhibition hall, you had the actual miserable factories where that glass and iron were being forged.
And the conditions there were often brutal. Now, some philanthropic industrialists attempted to build model environments.
Like where?
Like the textile mills in Lowell, Massachusetts, or Saltaire in the UK. They utilized fireproof iron frames and highly regimented, repetitive windows. They created terraced housing and bathhouses for workers.
Kind of like the utopian ideals we talked about earlier.
Yes, but the massive influx of people into urban centers rapidly outpaced any of this planning. The industrial machine created incredibly overcrowded, dark, polluted slum urbanism in cities like Manchester and Paris.
So the system was literally choking its own workforce.
Exactly.
Which makes sense. I mean, you can't just drop a massive, highly efficient factory into a medieval city without breaking the city.
No, the infrastructure just wasn't there.
The narrow streets literally couldn't handle the influx of thousands of workers, all the coal carts, the manufactured goods. The gridlock must have been insane.
It was, which forced architects and planners to stop looking at single buildings and start re-engineering the earth itself.
To manage the chaos.
Exactly. To manage these exploding populations and rationalize property, planners turned back to the orthogonal grid. You see this heavily in the relentless, expandable grids of American cities.
Like Savannah and Philadelphia.
Right. But the most dramatic example of urban re-engineering occurred in Paris under Baron Haussmann. This was between 1853 and 1870.
Haussmann essentially took a scalpel to medieval Paris. The sources say he carved something like 120 kilometers of wide, straight boulevards right through the heart of the old city.
He did. He demolished whole neighborhoods. And we have to understand the mechanics behind those beautiful boulevards. They weren't just for aesthetic grandeur.
Ew.
No. The narrow, twisting medieval streets of Paris were perfect for revolutionaries to build barricades, which they had done repeatedly in the first half of the 19th century.
Oh, wow. I see where this is going.
Haussmann's wide, straight avenues prevented those barricades. And, more importantly, they allowed troops and artillery to move quickly across the city to crush any uprisings.
So the urban design was a direct security apparatus.
Exactly. The beauty was a military countermeasure.
That is wild. I look at Paris today and see it as the ultimate romantic historic city with those gorgeous classical facades. But underneath that skin, Haussmann's Paris is basically an elegant cyborg.
An elegant cyborg.
Yeah. It looks classic, but it's really a modern, ruthlessly efficient machine made of sewer tunnels and gas lighting.
And that subterranean engineering was just as critical as the visible architecture. The new sewers and gas lines rationalized public health and movement, allowing the city to function at a true industrial scale.
It legitimized engineering as the primary driver of urban life.
It did. And this didn't stop at the borders of Europe or America either. Our sources detail how this architecture was utilized globally as a tool of empire.
They were literally shipping buildings across the ocean, weren't they?
They were. They were exporting cast iron lighthouse kits and prefabricated railway sheds to colonies across the globe.
Just flat-packing empire.
Exactly. Concurrently, imposing neoclassical capitals were rising in places like Buenos Aires and Calcutta. Empires were using a combination of hyper-efficient prefabricated architecture and recognizable Republican symbols to physically stitch their global territories together.
That is just, it's a lot to take in. When we step back and look at this whole 100-year deep dive, we've gone from digging up ancient Roman ruins in Pompeii to literally shipping iron lighthouses across the Atlantic.
It is a massive shift. The period from the 1750s to the 1850s fundamentally recast the entire purpose of architecture.
Yeah, you can really see the three forces we started with.
Exactly. The Enlightenment's focus on reason gave us rationalized civic spaces. The political revolutions fueled those utopian dreams of social control. Romanticism fought back to protect human emotion and history from becoming purely mechanized.
And industrialization gave us the iron and glass that constructed our modern reality.
Beautifully summarized.
Well, and for you listening right now, I think the wildest part of this history is that today's architects and city planners are still fighting these exact same battles.
Oh, without a doubt.
Every time you read a debate about whether a new urban development should be a hyper-efficient, data-driven, smart city, or whether it should reflect the local, emotional character of the neighborhood, you are witnessing the echoes of this exact 100-year architectural war.
The tension between cold standardization and romantic individuality really never went away.
It just changed materials.
Which actually leaves us with a rather provocative thought to consider.
Oh. What's that?
Well, we've seen how the 19th century used physical materials, cast iron, steam, and 900,000 panes of glass to manifest the massive shifts of the Industrial Revolution into the literal walls around them.
Oh, wait.
It makes you wonder, what invisible materials like massive data sets, behavioral algorithms, or artificial intelligence are secretly restructuring the physical walls in cities around us right now?
Wow. That is definitely something to think about the next time you walk out of your front door. Because as we've learned today, buildings are never just silent shelters. Every wall is an argument.